Well, yeah, it's going to thunderstorm. That's why that's one of the many reasons why we are so tired. So it's because of the weather. So, but fortunately, this episode, you don't have to do much but listen and react. I'm the one who's got all the important stuff.
Okay.
You
No
may
more
have to
yawning.
cut out several yawns.
Oh God. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's make a podcast before we pass out.
Let's make a podcast.
Hello and welcome in to another episode of Gifted Kid, Messy Adult, a neurodiversity podcast. The show where potential went to die. I'm one of your hosts, Ellie Michaels. I use she, her.
I am your other host, Jessica Michaels. I use she, they.
And today we are talking about ADA something. I'm not talking about it. You're
Yeah.
talking about it. So it's okay that I don't know what we're talking about. What are we talking about?
Yes. We today are talking about the Gang of 19.
It's this that's the sequel to like American Gangs, or was that like the movie with he's got the weird eye and he's like got a flag draped over him, top hat and stuff.
Gang of 19 does sound like it should be a movie title, frankly. But it is actually the name of a group of protesters. And this is in honor, as you mentioned. It is this year, in July, was the 35th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I think one of the things, if people know about the history of the Americans with Disabilities Act,
That's a heavy if.
that's a heavy if. That is a heavy if. But sort of one of the more famous moments of the trip to getting the ADA signed, and it was signed by George H.W. Bush. There was a famous protest where about 1,000 disability rights activists from across the country gathered at the bottom steps of the United States Capitol, which was not then accessible to the physically disabled. So this was in 1990. Still, it was inaccessible. The goal of the protest was for those who could to leave their mobility devices, meaning, not walking up the stairs, but crawling up the stairs to the Capitol to show how difficult it was for people who were in wheelchairs or who had physical disabilities. The youngest protester of that protest was just 8 years old. And
Whew.
that event, is known as the Capitol Crawl. And so you may see pictures in museums, or as people talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act, of people crawling up. And I didn't realize they took their wheelchairs with them, which I guess makes sense. I don't know what I thought they were going to do when they got there if they didn't have their wheelchairs. So they're crawling up, hauling their mobility devices with them. And it really was a stunning protest, and certainly worth remembering for sure. But that was not the only protest where people with disabilities put their bodies on the line in furtherance of this goal of disability rights. And I was recently honored to be invited to a presentation that was a part of the celebration of the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I learned more about a story that I had not heard very much about. And I thought that it would be a great thing for our listeners to hear about. And it's the story of the Gang of 19. And famously, the Gang of 19 is actually local to us. This protest happened right in Denver, Colorado, which is even more, I
Hey.
think, unforgivable that this isn't something that is widely known. So I wanted to share. That's what we're going to talk about today. I was very fortunate to hear the last two living members of the Gang of 19, as well as one of the leaders of the disability rights movement at the time, speak. I am going to be using in my guidance for this episode an article published by the History Colorado Center, who interviewed those same people so that I can accurately convey the information, because I would hate to I think I started out wanting to take notes and was just so enthralled by hearing the story of this protest and this history. I don't even remember when I put my notebook and pen down, but it certainly happened, and I was just wrapped. So yes, so I am using the History of Colorado Center article as a resource. So one of the things that I did not think about or hadn't thought about is that in, prior to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and well into the 80s and definitely in the 70s, the idea was for people with disabilities to be removed from their homes and institutionalized. They were removed from their families, and their families were told, they're going to be better off. They're not going to be able to live in society. They're going to be better off. They'll have all their needs met in these institutions.
That always goes well.
Exactly. Conditions were often, were often very substandard. And for a lot of these people that were, we think of nursing homes really as being places where old people end up. But a lot of the people who were people with disabilities were put in nursing homes at very young ages as children. And that is, the place that they knew. They were kept separate from the public. And, this is a time before the internet. And so it's not like they had a lot of power to get the word out about what was happening, to organize, to connect with each other. It was like, living in a hospital your whole life. Certainly not things like jobs or getting married or having families or having your own home. These were things that just didn't want, the society assumed people with disabilities either couldn't do or shouldn't do. And one of the main elements of the disability rights movement that still exists, which is people saying, hey, we don't want pity. We don't want special things. We just want to participate in society like everybody else. We're not inspiring, we're just people trying to live our lives and trying to get the right to live lives. It was this same situation that was occurred here in Denver, which is where, a lot of people with disabilities were in institutions. And there was one particular institution in Denver called the Heritage House. That is where a group of individuals who were younger kind of had their own grouping, had their own wing. If you think of anybody who's a teenager, you're already restless. You're already trying to get out under people's thumb. You're already trying to figure out your identity without, this added nonsense of people thinking that you need to be in an institution. Now, one of the things that was happening, that made that even more challenging was the fact that public transit, where it did exist, was not available for people with disabilities. We think right now, it's so easy for us to picture, ramps and lifts and things like that. But those things simply did not exist. There was a system that was called Handy Ride that was created for people with disabilities, and the idea was that it covered these, like, a couple major transit hubs. The sentiment was if you were able to use it and it was going where you were going and you could access it, then it was great. But there were a lot of problems with it. It was, they were often very late. Sometimes they didn't show up. You had to reserve, up to a week in advance a ride. So it just wasn't dependable. It wasn't reliable, and it was very expensive. And that is very comparable to a lot of the paratransit systems that did exist across the United States. If these things existed, that's sort of the state that they were in. If you think about, again, these people over at the Heritage House, which was not even a great nursing home by nursing home standards, you've got young people. The only access that they might have to transportation is not reliable. It is not good. There was a kind of care manager who came to the nursing home, who was sort of put in charge of the residents in this wing. And his name was Barry Rosenberg, and he's actually who I heard speak. And he was in the habit of he had a like a VW bus kind of van, and he ripped all like the seats out so he could cram a bunch of people in their wheelchairs into this van, and that's the best they could do. And they would go out and go to go to concerts and go to just go camping and go all of these places, just to give these residents sort of a taste of the outside. They also instituted things like at the nursing home, that staff members should knock before entering the rooms of these residents, which was not something that was policy before. They brought in alcohol so that people could, if you're over 21, you could actually have a glass of wine with your dinner. And these were things that were kind of unheard of, really just treating disabled people like
people.
There was another activist who worked in this heritage house. His name was Wade Blank. And if people are going to know somebody from this grouping, Wade Blank is the name that people will remember. But again, I didn't know any of this. So if you don't, it is okay. But he was a minister and an activist, and he and Barry Rosenberg eventually knew that they were probably going to be asked to leave Heritage House if they didn't leave on their own. So they just decided to depart, and they actually started.
I'll sit myself out.
Exactly, because these things that they were doing were not popular with the nursing staff. This idea of treating disabled people as people was just really revolutionary, and not everybody likes to move with the times. So,
shocking.
I know. And it's amazing to me, this idea of infantilization for people with disabilities has just always been a part of society. That if something's wrong with people's legs, suddenly assume there's something wrong with their brain. If somebody thinks differently, then we assume that means they can't think at all. It's just, we think of these times of the 60s as the times of real revolution and change, but for a lot of groups, as we know, that was not the time. The coin didn't flip entirely to the other side for a lot of groups. That was the beginning of a lot of things, but certainly a lot of groups are still fighting for recognition and rights today, and this group is certainly one of them.
What's that
so
like?
A lot of the residents, ended up moving out of the Heritage House and moving kind of with this group that was started. And that group was called Atlantis. And that group, Atlantis, is one of the founding groups that kind of had this idea that disabled people should live independently. At the same time, there was another group that was forming called ADAPT, which stood for Americans Disabled for Accessible Public Transit. They have a different acronym now, but that was what they were at the time. So basically, you kind of took this group of people with disabilities, and they needed everything. They needed all the rights because they had none. So they're fighting on the terms of, they need education, they need housing, they need medical care, they need transit was one of the issues. And that's kind of where the Gang of 19 came about. And they would protest things like curb cuts. So curb cuts are, just as you're those little dips in the curb that let you take a wheelchair down, or take a stroller or a wheeled suitcase.
Like at the crosswalks.
Exactly.
Like how the driveway slopes down so you don't thump down with your car.
Renata Conrad, who's one of the people that I got to see speak, one of the last two surviving members of the Gang of 19, described disabled people taking sledgehammers to the curbs to chip away at curbs to show people these for the ramps to be built, curbs need to be broken. And so if we think of this group that not many people have heard of, this Atlantis group, and what a huge impact they have had, because curb cuts are everywhere. There's things that we take for granted as being part of our society, and that became as a direct result of protests like this. So about the same time, in Denver, there had been passed a huge legislation for like $5 billion, I think, to take all of these little regional transportation providers and put them all together so that you could actually have a consistent transportation system around the Denver metro area. And that's how the RTD came into place. So it used to be all these little teeny independent agencies running buses, which just sounds so crazy to me. And they came together as one group. And the disabled rights activists said, and we're going to make these buses accessible, right? And RTD basically said, no, we're not. It's going to cost a lot of money. And they said, well, the compromise they came to is, well, we will design them so that they can accept a retrofit. But in order to get a retrofit, we need money, and the court's going to need to tell us that we need to do it. The disabled rights activists said, all right, then we're going to sue.
Oh, you want this? Sue me. Sues them.
It's how, there was really this idea that nothing can get done unless the court says it. I got the sense that from Renata, and then from John Holland, who's another person that we saw speak, that there just wasn't a lot of faith that people were truly going to organize. They weren't going to get a lawsuit together. The transportation officials really were kind of just patting people on the head. Like, yeah, sure, we'll get you your retrofit. You just come down and do all this stuff, never thinking that these disability rights advocates were going to do it. But they did. Now, ultimately, though, the disability rights advocates lost the case. Court said no, that they were not entitled to this retrofit. And that really kind of galvanized a lot of the disability rights activists, because they knew that, all right, going to the courts, the good way to do things, that didn't work. So the only way we're going to make a difference is by forcing the issue with protesting. And that is what is going to happen. So they organized this protest where they were going to stop a Denver bus. Bob Conrad, who is the husband of Renata Conrad, so those are the two members of the Gang of 19 that I saw, Bob and Renata. He said that you actually only need 3 people to stop a bus, which is good information to know. You need somebody
or a big enough rock.
You need somebody at the side so that they can't turn. And then you put somebody on the door, and then, and you got the bus. So they plan to stop a bus. Essentially, they had this gang of protesters in wheelchairs who came around and stopped one RTD bus in Denver. And then another city bus came and didn't see the protesters. So it kind of got in front of this other bus, and they thought, well, heck, we're already here. We'll just stop this one too. So 19 protesters chained themselves to 2 municipal buses in Denver. And again, these are disabled activists. So they're chaining their wheelchairs. They're laying on the ground, on the hot ground. This is July in Denver.
Ooh.
It is hot here. It is hot. We are, very, we say we're a mile closer to the sun. They're laying on asphalt. They're laying flat on pavement.
Pedantic editor Ellie here. The difference is not actually that we're a mile closer to the sun. The distance between the Earth and the sun varies by about 3 million miles throughout the year because of the elliptical orbit. The difference is that we have a mile of atmosphere missing, that the sunlight doesn't diffuse through, so our sunlight is very strong, and so any surfaces that hit get very hot very quickly. Anyways.
Chained to these buses, and to protest the fact that having a public transportation system means you have to be accessible to the public, and disabled people are members of the public, exactly, which is revolutionary, revolutionary. It really created this interesting situation outside of just a normal protest, right? Which a protest is designed to be disruptive, so created, traffic and all of these things. And normally police would come in and they would arrest protesters, but this put the police in a quandary. They did not want to be seen as arresting disabled people.
Oh, what an innocent age.
And part of the problem was cop cars aren't accessible, jails aren't accessible. What are they going to do if they do arrest these people? What are they going to do with them? They don't have any way to handle these people. So, and also there was sort of some of that infantilization going on of, oh, you can't arrest these disabled people because they don't really know what they're doing. They're not fully people. They're not adults. They don't know. So it's some of that demeaning attitude even got to the place where the protesters couldn't even get themselves arrested. Instead, police arrested bystanders.
That tracks. It's like it's like the helmet cam video of the guy at the red light on a motorcycle, and there's a cop car next to him, and like six other motorcycles go blowing past between traffic going through the red light, and this guy's just sitting there like, what was that?
Mm-hmm.
And then the cops turn their lights on and get out and start arresting the dude who was there. Like, what?
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah,
literally just next to this.
it's just so insane because, I mean, from a police standpoint, you don't want to arrest these protesters, right? So you arrest the people just standing around watching the protest. What kind of message does that send? You know, Suddenly
That
you
we have
can't just
power and you don't.
witness a protest. So one of the famous civil rights attorneys who's actually still practicing today, and he again, I got to see him speak. His name was John Holland, and he has been a part of many famous civil rights cases throughout the 70s and through till today. His point was that this idea to arrest able-bodied people who were watching the protest and aides, there were people, a lot of people who work with the disabled people are like CNAs, certified nursing assistants. They would have attendants that would bring their medicine. They would have people whose job it is to assist. And those people got arrested as well. The attendants would get arrested. So John Holland, the attorney's point was, when you look at what the city of Denver did by arresting those people, it's who is really guilty? Who was the one that was guilty of interfering with public transportation, which was the crime? Well, that would be the disabled folks. But it wasn't the attendants or the observers, and that's who was arrested. John Holland's, the attorney's point was the system didn't even respect our people enough to arrest them. That's how little people with disabilities were thought of. So how do you have a civil rights movement if you can't even get arrested? Like, that's sort of the crux of the whole situation is you have to prove even that you're a person worth paying attention to at all for
Mm-hmm.
your protest even to mean anything. The attorney had to go to court and filed a motion to dismiss all of the claims against the attendants because they were saying you can't charge the attendants, you would have to charge the disabled people. Essentially, they had to earn the right to be arrested. That's what they went to court for. They went to court to fight for the right to get arrested. And, they've been successful. Bob and Renata, the two Gang of 19 protesters, have talked about they've been arrested now in so many cities they can't even keep count. So that was a good success. Disabled people can now get arrested.
This entire debacle doesn't make sense if you think that the justice system's point is to do justice. But if you look at it in the sense that the Justice Department's point is to do retribution. So we
Mm-hmm.
can't arrest these disabled people because we just can't be bothered to put in the extra effort to haul them in their wheelchairs around and help them around the jail. Well, why does Spider-Man wear a mask? Because his rationale is that he has people that he loves. And if the people that he fights find out that, he's got Mary Jane Watson and he's got Aunt May, they're going to go after them. So one, people witnessing the protest are part of the problem because if everyone just ignored this, there wouldn't be a problem here. And then two, the attendants are facilitating these people doing this protest. And if you come down hard enough on somebody's friends and family, they're eventually going to cave too. The line from Hamilton from You'll Be Back, I will kill your friends and family to
Yeah.
remind you of my love.
Hmm.
Like, if we can't find the rebels, that's fine. Where are their families? What kind of person gives those orders, Damar?
One of the reasons these protests were so striking, the Capitol crawl and this Gang of 19 protest, is that this was a group of people who looked utterly powerless. I mean, for a lot of people, they hadn't seen disabled people because disabled people were removed from society. You didn't go to school, there weren't special ed classes, you didn't have disabled people integrating, you didn't have handicap parking. None of these things existed. Disabled people were behind closed doors, and that could be autistic people, certainly. Anybody with an intellectual disability, people with learning disabilities, people with physical disabilities, really any measure that they could take and say this person isn't normal, then institutions were the way to go. And we say were because unfortunately these situations are not things of the past, by any stretch. And people with mental health disorders, people who don't adhere to the gender binary, still disabled people, are still seen as people who can be and in many cases should be removed from society by forcibly, and it's often couched as being for their own good. And that was what a lot of this was, is that's what these families were told, is these people need your friends, your family members, your siblings, your children, they need to be removed for their own good, for your good as a family. Their presence will harm their siblings. If they're siblings, it will, they'll never amount to anything. They need to be in a place where they can be taken care of for their own good, because they're broken. The amount of powerlessness when you are somebody who can't even determine what time to go to bed as an adult. You can't decide where to live. You can't decide what you eat. You can't get a job, so you can't earn money. You can't get access to any education. You can't interact, with other, all of those things are dictated for you. Can you think of a more powerless situation to be in? What do you do?
Well, the honest answer to that is the only way you could be more powerless is if you were shipped to one of the camps that we have now. And given that it's early August of 2025, there was also just an executive order saying that anyone who has any kind of mental illness that causes them to be a danger to themselves or others can be forcibly institutionalized. And also remember the part where they say that people who don't like the current regime have derangement syndromes over that, and they've been calling us mentally ill for decades.
It's also homeless people too.
Yes, being poor is a mental illness, clearly.
So the way it's sort of, because when these protesters in the 70s were coming out and chaining themselves to buses and crawling up the steps of the Capitol, which was in the 90s, society wasn't used to seeing people with disabilities as anything, as people with power, or at all, people who should be part of society. Now I think we almost have a situation where people have sort of gotten used to seeing or knowing about people with disabilities. And there's this idea that people with disabilities get too much now and are asking for too much. They're asking, they get special treatment. They're asking for things that they shouldn't get. They're getting more than other people deserve. So we've sort of come this weird, it's like this weird leap in awareness, where before protesting to be seen and recognized, and now it's sort of like people know that we're here, but getting people to understand truly what the reality is, what circumstances are, what people are asking for, which is really just to live lives and be left alone. Honestly, there really isn't, it isn't a question of, be asking for things that other people don't have. Like these protesters were asking for the bus. If you are somebody who takes the city bus, the city bus is not the height of glamorous travel. People are
Mm-hmm.
not asking for private jets or to be chauffeured door to door. They were asking for the right to access the city bus.
Mm-hmm.
And but access to transit, I mean, if you can't get around, you are so limited in what you can do as a human.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the Gang of 19 was one protest. There were many protests. There were other protests where, they would occupy and chain themselves to like the front of hotels where meetings were happening. So if people wanted to get in, they had to climb over the people in wheelchairs, which is, great optics. And so there was this, it was a whole movement, but ultimately in June of 82, RTD, which is the transportation group that was being protested, ordered 89 accessible new buses and agreed that all of their fleet would be given retrofitted with wheelchair lifts. And by 1985, which was 5 years before the ADA was passed, Denver became the first major metropolitan area in the United States to have a fully wheelchair accessible bus system. And that is something that they have maintained. So before the ADA was passed, these protesters were able to get things going in Denver, which has since become kind of a model city, a model transportation system for other areas, municipalities that are looking at becoming accessible. And it really goes back to the bravery of 19 people just laying on that pavement, in July in Denver, risking injury. I mean, we know people with disabilities generally do not have the most robust immune systems. They're risking serious injury when there's parts of your body you can't feel, and now you're laying on the hot concrete. I mean, the risk of, burns and infections and exposure and dehydration and not having access to your medication and not having access to food and all of these things, they were willing to die for this cause, which is why I think it's such a shame that this story is not more widely known. And so that's the Gang of 19 protesters. Forerunner to getting the ADA passed was the RTD accessibility in Denver, and certainly a lot of those individuals who were part of that protest, Wade Blank, Renata, and John Conrad, were instrumental also in further activism for to get the ADA passed. So and they're still going today. So yeah, so that's the Gang of 19. Have you heard any of that?
Not a whisper, not a word.
Yeah,
And I'm not exactly like new to the disability sphere and whatnot. Like,
right.
I spent a goodly amount of the last 5 years or so, 7 years,
Mm-hmm.
kind of bedridden. So yeah, no, this is more things that should be taught and haven't been so far.
That's what I just kept thinking. Like if we didn't know about this and we have reason to know about it, how would why would other people know who have no connection to this area or to this cause?
Like, we're
So,
nerds, we're disabled, and we're
right?
disability nerds. Like,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
our jam.
Absolutely. And for our gifted kids, like this is such fun trivia, that this
Hmm.
Gang of 19, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. Oh, and it was announced that one of the major transportation hubs in the state of Colorado is going to be renamed after Reverend Wade Blank, one of the activists and the one of the creators of the Atlantis group. So hopefully that will drive some recognition in the city of Denver. There is going to be a monument that is going to be erected in Civic Center Park. They're redoing this whole park complex to be accessible, which it isn't currently. And the centerpiece monument is going to be look like a protest button that says "We will ride," which is what the protesters chanted. So hopefully that will bring some more recognition and some more attention locally to the Gang of 19, and hopefully this brings some recognition outside of just the Denver area. These brave folks who really got things rolling, no pun intended, for disability rights.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not intended? That was not intended?
I didn't say it before now, which I think is pretty good. Um,
Well, it's annoying to know that it's still the same fight, but it's nice to know that the fight has been won before, even if just for a few decades. Well, I think that'll just about wrap it up for this episode of Gifted Kid, Messy Adult. Jess, where can people find out more about you?
People can find me at coachjessicamichaels.com. They can find out about having me come to your workplace and help your workplace become more neuro inclusive.
Nice. And if you like our show, please rate and review us on Spotify and iTunes specifically. Even if you don't usually use iTunes, those ratings get used elsewhere. Subscribe to us on YouTube and like those as well. And for any other information, please email us your questions, comments, or just outright praise to giftedkidmessyadult@gmail.com. And until next time, take care of each other out there.
Bye.